911, what is your emergency?
I need an actual address. Is there a condo right there at the beach? I'm trying to go off the beach to get an address.
Did she say where she is?
We're trying to find you on the map, sweetie. Your cell phone's hidden, okay?
I cannot get this address to come up.
And they're screaming.
This right here happens far too often. That's because more than 80% of 911 calls are made from cell phones. An outdated landline-era infrastructure makes it difficult for 911 centers to locate their callers. According to regulators, location accuracy is a significant public safety concern, and fixing the system could save over 10,000 lives and at least $97 billion per year.
You may never need to call 911, but if you do, it may be the most important call you ever make in your lifetime.
I can order a pizza on an app on my mobile device, and I can see that driver delivering that pizza to my location. Why does 911 not know where I'm at?
The 911 system is funded and run locally, but states and municipalities haven't been able to fix shortcomings on their own. Big tech companies like Apple, Google, and Motorola, as well as a number of startups, are trying to solve the technology gap. But so far, that hasn't been enough.
Candidly, I started out believing that, some smart computer nerds could easily solve this problem because it just seems so simple, right? Like, just take data from a smartphone and throw it on a web browser in front of a 911 agent. And it's not until you go and you listen to calls and you realize the intensity.
What kind of vehicle are you in? Are you actually on Route 10 or are you in the parking lot?
Where every single moment and second matters.
There's currently a draft proposal for legislation on a $15 billion complete overhaul of the system, but that's not a guarantee. In the summer of 2020, a similar proposal didn't pass through the Senate.
We're tired of investing over and over and over in public safety and solutions that work for 5 years, then we throw it out and buy another one. We need a coordinated, wholesale move to next generation as a nation.
So why is the 911 system, a service so instrumental to the safety of the public, so broken? And why isn't the federal government or the tech industry able to fix it?
Nearly every American, no matter their age, knows to call 911 in case of an emergency. But the system is relatively new. It was created by Congress in 1968 in conjunction with AT&T in a public-private partnership. It wasn't until 1987 that about 50% of the population had access to the service. And it wasn't until the early 2000s that we started to see full-scale adoption.
It's a much newer, younger system than people realize. And so it doesn't have the history of strong funding, of governance. Sometimes these counties are mostly on their own, and they may not have the technology expertise, the procurement expertise.
Okay, where did the accident take place?
This is one of the 5,211 public safety answering points in America. They're also known as PSAPs. In the early days, all calls came from landlines. Call centers had databases of every landline phone number and the street address associated with it, so it was simple. But cell phones changed everything. Like landlines, cell phones have an owner and a billing address, but that doesn't say much about where a call is coming from.
I would remember times where I could just feel my heart beating and racing, wanting to make sure that I can help this person and do the very best that I could. So, back then it was really important to know my city so well that I didn't have to use a map to ask these questions. But our cities get very complex and construction changes, and we are even more mobile than we used to be. And that also spans across generations. You have children that are calling from mobile devices, you have elderly folks calling from mobile devices, and everything in between.
When a call comes to 911 from a cell phone, it bounces off of the nearest cell phone tower. That directs them to the nearest emergency call center.
But that can be unpredictable. Sometimes calls are picked up by towers that are further away, and that can have disastrous repercussions.
911, what is the address of your emergency? I'm in a car in a lake. Where?
A well-known call from 2014 came from Chanel Anderson, who was just outside of Atlanta, Georgia. Now, when Anderson called 911 after losing control of her car, her cell phone was outside of the call center's district and the operator couldn't locate it.
Fairway, I don't have that. Is that in Milton? What city is that in? 30188. I'm losing it all very quickly.
Anderson died a week later. But there's another problem.
Even in cases when the call reaches the right phone center, it doesn't necessarily mean the operator can quickly trace it to the right location. That's because many cell phone carriers rely on something called triangulation, which locates callers by measuring the distance between the towers that pick up the call. That process locates the caller within 50 to 300 meters of where they are, depending on the type of technology used. That's up to 3 football fields, which isn't too bad in a rural area, but for a dense urban area, that distance can be intimidating. Another big problem, neither of these technologies addresses altitude.
If Uber can find me, why can 911 not? When you're talking a consumer app, you can roll out new technology pretty easily on these devices that are in our hands. It's a pocket computer.
There have been countless attempts at updating technology as consumer behavior has changed.
First, it was Enhanced 911 that automatically read a caller's name, location, and phone number. Then, with the emergence of cell phones, the FCC introduced Wireless Enhanced 911 Location Accuracy Rules for carriers.
Those regulations have been revised time and time again as carriers have pushed back against stricter rules.
By the early 2000s, the shortcomings of the 911 system had become too significant, and the U.S. Department of Transportation launched its Next Gen 911 initiative. The goal was to transition the legacy system to IP-based NG 911 technology that could support things like text messages and video streaming. Centers would be able to receive, process, and analyze all types of requests and share relevant information with other centers and responders. While substantial investments have been made by states and jurisdictions, adoption, training, and funding has been uneven.
Next Gen 911 has been challenged by 2 things. One, a lack of clear direction of accredited standards, as well as the inability of local agencies to fund themselves up to that next level. It's very expensive, and it's much more complex than it used to be.
Funding for 911 is collected by telecommunication providers on wireline and wireless phone bills. In 2019, states and other reporting jurisdictions collected over $3 billion in total 911 fees and charges. How that funding was managed varied widely. States including Florida, New York, and Iowa barely covered costs. Others like Arizona, Massachusetts, and Minnesota were left with a surplus. While New York only covered 3% of costs with its fees, the data shows a troubling reality that has long haunted advocates: diversion of funds. In 2019, New York and 4 other states diverted over $200 million of their collected fees to purposes other than 911. Between 2012 and 2018, a total of $1.28 billion was diverted to non-911 purposes. Now, while it is legal, the FCC has found that it directly undermines public safety communication and could put lives at risk. But Captain Meyer is hoping that new legislation can stop that. That's if Congress passes a $15 billion bill to overhaul the system once and for all.
Technologies change and evolve. That's why we look to the federal system to really help us look at it from a cybersecurity aspect, number one, but also for an integration aspect, because we're talking about diversity of equipment connecting across these IP networks in a very complex manner. And if there are proprietary interfaces anywhere in between there, they're not going to be able to talk. Someone in a vehicle moving across municipal lines needs to be able to have their call handled by the appropriate jurisdiction. And those things happen so rapidly now. Our technology is continually trying to catch up and playing catch up.
The federal government has stepped in and helped states and tribal nations with their 911 services before. In 2019, the Department of Commerce and the Department of Transportation announced a $109 million grant.
We're looking at 50 states, 6 territories. That's not a lot of money. And so it didn't really have the impact I think they thought it would have. President Biden has been supportive of what we're trying to do, so we want to move this forward this Congress.
In the past few years, a glimmer of hope for the 911 system has been the tech industry.
That call that just came in, the RapidSOS, it did come up, so it really shows you like exactly where the complex that this gentleman lives in. I think it's great.
This is RapidSOS, a data integration platform used at this and about 4,800 other PSAPs around the country. They're not changing anything in the existing infrastructure. Instead, the software acts as a supplement.
But if you notice, it says that the phone is RapidSOS capable, so that's how we know that it has that possibility. Not all phones do that.
The top of the hourglass is all this rich content and data, right? Like I'm wearing a Apple Watch right now, my smartphone's connected, my building's connected, like there's something like 20 billion connected devices out there. But in an emergency, none of that data, right? Real-time heart rate, pre-existing health conditions, precise location can be accessed by 911 because the connection point between the two is this drip, drip, drip of information that is basically a 1960s analog voice call. So what we do is turn this bottleneck into this rich data pipe.
That data comes from partners like Apple, Google, SiriusXM, Uber, and Microsoft. According to their own study of nearly 5,000 911 agencies, 92% of dispatchers say that the system has sped up their response process.
We're getting amazing metrics coming off these phones so quickly, it's better than what I'm getting on my phase 2 wireless that I've had for many years. But my concern would be long-term is, how do we continue to fund such a cool solution and not put somebody in the poorhouse?
RapidSOS's business model is simple. Charge companies like Uber and Apple, whose data passes through their software, and those who benefit the most from the success of 911, like insurance companies.
The company says it's supporting 150 million emergencies per year, covering about 92% of the country. Though they've raised $200 million in funding, they're far from profitable.
Well, technology has been our partner, 100% aligned. We are together on this, but we're a small niche. That's the problem. When we look at what vendors are doing for Apple phones, they sell millions and millions and millions of Apple phones, but there's only 6,000 911 centers in the United States. So the scale makes it a challenge for us to get that innovation.
RapidSOS is just one of many companies that's working on a solution.
And as of now, none of them have been able to make the dent necessary. According to Meyer, the only way the over 5,000 systems can get to a level playing field is if the federal government steps up. So far, that's yet to pass.
Okay, and you said there's no injuries there? You don't have a headache? You didn't lose consciousness?